My name's Dermot Gracebrook. I'm here with Jannie from IQ, and we're going to chat a little bit about e-learning and gamification and some of the latest trends and best practice. Welcome, Jannie.
Thank you, Dermot.
Welcome to Cape Town. It must be nice being here from Joburg.
Love being down in Cape Town. I've basically been working in e-learning for the past 15 years, exploring different kinds of e-learning, and I think there's a level of maturity that's been reached by a lot of our clients as well to understand that, your e-learning really is here to stay. And in fact, there's going to be an exponential growth in the amount of e-learning that they include in their blended learning offerings.
Okay, and what is it like you do in that space? What work have they done, and what work are they moving towards?
Let me give you one example that we did for a financial institution, specifically the customer contact center within that financial institution. What we did there was to bring in a gamification element of superheroes, where the various skill sets that they had to adopt as customer contact centers were kind of embodied in various superheroes. So as they went through the learning, which was a blended initiative and included some e-learning, in fact it included facilitated e-learning, they had to complete various challenges to gain that superhero power. So at the end of the day, they could become that customer contact center superhero that embodied all of these various powers that the superheroes typically had. We found it to be a great success. Even with a basic form of gamification like this, and I'm hesitant to call it full gamification because it really isn't, but it allowed enough engagement on the learner side to have a good storyline and to follow the entire course through as they wanted to desperately, achieve all of the powers that they could.
You just mentioned there around perhaps that example not being full gamification. So clearly there's a range of ways companies go about trying to implement this, and perhaps there's incremental levels they can start with and move towards. What would be sort of your advice around how to get started in gamification, and why perhaps the example you gave around superheroes, where it's not full gamification but it's taking some of the principles, why that's a good way to start?
Well, I think it's more out of necessity than anything else, because typically we get told by clients that we've got a limited budget and we've got a very specific timeline. So that obviously excludes you developing really immersive games, because those typically take a long period of time, and clients don't always realize that. So I think it's really to start off with creating a culture of gamified learning within your organization, to look at quick wins, to bring in a little bit of a collection strategy into your e-learning courses, for example, that at least keeps the learner engaged throughout because they're collecting these little components. Or to start leveraging social media in a gamified way as well, to create portals where people can start contributing, and where they get rewarded for their contributions, and they start building a visible profile. That's a different form of gamification. It's a scoreboard. It shows who's at the top of the heap, and people really like that kind of visibility, and it assists in increasing their contributions and their tacit knowledge contributions to a central space within your organization.
So if it takes a lot of time to develop a proper gamification, and often organizations are constrained either in time, money, or both, and most organizations do have to move quite fast on learning initiatives, why will business in an L&D space ever fully adopt gamification, its principles, and apply it? And if so, what would that mean? It sounds like it's going to be very difficult for them ever to get into that point. And perhaps what sort of scenarios would that be applicable in?
Look, I think there's two things that are likely to happen. It's going to become easier to create gamified solutions. And we're already seeing that some of the authoring tools are starting to think in that direction and making it easier to build those in when you're an instructional designer. I think you're always going to have the differentiation between base gamified solutions and the really epic ones. But I think businesses will have to start weighing up where their business benefit resides, and where they want to put money. Because if it's something that they really need to affect, that they really need to change, they might have to put that money into doing something that's really on a big scale. And of course, if they can put a business case and an ROI against that and validate that, it starts becoming easier to make those decisions.
Okay, so just for people perhaps who aren't familiar with the concepts, what's the difference between e-learning and gamification? Right? So what's the definition of e-learning? What's the definition of gamification?
Okay, look, even the definition of e-learning is problematic because e-learning has become a lot of things. But really, one could say that e-learning is really any way in which you're learning digitally, and there's not necessarily a facilitator facilitating that material. So, I mean, you could argue that going onto Googling is a form of e-learning, because you're getting, you're achieving information that you needed to close a specific knowledge gap, and you used an electronic platform to do so. So I think e-learning has really become so wide that it's difficult to pin it down in a single definition. But it's typically learning that's enabled via some form of electronical medium. So gamification, in essence, is taking elements that we typically find in popular games and making them applicable to non-gaming situations. So, for example, you might be learning something very serious, let's say compliance, and you might present it to your learners as a form of a game where they need to perform specific actions to achieve a certain goal, and the learning would then take place by way of playing that game.
So is basically gamification just a way of trying to make learning not boring, or is it something more than that?
I think ideally, I think some people are trying to use it to make learning less boring, and unfortunately I don't think you're necessarily going to succeed at it if that is your primary goal. I think the game element needs to be really embedded in the learning that needs to take place. So there needs to almost be a subconscious level of learning taking place while you're busy with the actions of playing the game, while you're achieving the goal in line with the set of agreed rules. There needs to be an absorption of knowledge, there needs to be an application of skill, and then there even needs to be some kind of understanding of the behavior that you need to exhibit while you're applying that knowledge and skills within the context of the workplace. So if those things aren't there and the game is not enforcing that or enabling that, then you're busy with a superficial kind of gamification.
So why should business, and particularly learning and development departments or HR departments, why should they care about gamification?
They should care about gamification because gaming has got it right. It's one of the biggest growing industries. If you look at the popular literature, you'll see that or not everybody, but billions of hours are spent a week people gaming. So there must be a reason why they're migrating to that space. And ideally you want to find out why. And you want to use that in what you're doing, because you're simply going to have you're competing with these compelling things like games, entertainment, and if you're not giving people something in their work life which is at least equally compelling, they're simply going to lose interest and they're going to check out.
Where does it really matter? Because you've got lots of different levels of workers. You've got senior managers, you've got people who are very skilled professionals, very technical, very non-technical, creatives, non-creatives. And then you have people obviously with very high educational levels and people with very minimal educational levels doing very repetitive manual work. And I suppose games, everyone plays games, but in a workspace, where do you start to try and place, where do they have maximum impact? If it's around conceptual engagement and productivity, does that mean it's with the knowledge workers and managers? Or if it's around making work meaningful that's very repetitive and you don't see the big picture like a call center or factory, is it there, or is it all of them? But it can't be the same. So how do you go about as an L&D professional in a big organization trying to get the most from applying this?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think there's different gaming solutions for different learning challenges. It is a way of making menial work more meaningful, and at the same time, it also offers you those environments that would allow people that are busy with strategic thinking and those things to take that even further. But where do you start in the organization? Typically, where we find where it comes from is just where it affects the bottom line. Those things that have got a direct impact on productivity, on production, on quality. Those are the places where you start looking. And then, as with any learning intervention, it's a case of doing the analysis and understanding what the business parameters are that you need to affect before you even start looking at some kind of initiative, whether it is a normal learning initiative or whether there needs to be a gaming component associated with it.
So if you're an L&D professional, you're a HR manager, and either a big organization or a small organization, clearly these are skill sets and expertise that don't sit within a traditional organization. So if you feel that this is something, whether it be e-learning or gamification, that you want to start exploring for your organization, or you've been given an instruction to start actually looking at how the business can incorporate this stuff, how do you recommend HR managers or L&D managers go about doing this? Who do they talk to? Where do they go? How should they vet and choose suppliers or staff to do this?
Yeah, well, I pity those roles, because the skill set that you now need to have within that space is just ever growing. Right from the business analysis that you actually should be able to do, right down to the delivery of these technically intense solutions. So I think that my best recommendation would be is to be aware of what's taking place, all of these changes, and then to seek out partners that you can build a long-term relationship with, that's willing to assist you, but grow with you and to share the knowledge that they have, so that over time you become empowered as well. And should you want to take those kind of functions in-house, that you at least build a sound foundation to do so. But often it's not the core function of a specific organization, and they don't want to do that. And then it's imperative to find a vendor that you've got a good relationship with, that is actually enabling the vision that you as an HR or L&D person has, and are true to that vision. And obviously do that for you always at a high level of quality, but also at an acceptable level of cost and within an appropriate time frame.
And I suppose the amount of people who operate in this space, the amount of information online and in books around in this space is vast. So if people want to get started and speak to an expert, can they speak to you, give you a call and speak to you?
They are more than welcome.